All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week so far. We are live on AMP. So if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast feeds, don't forget that AMP is the very first place that you guys can get these shows. Continuing our top 25 players of the last 25 years today with one of my all-time favorites, Mr. Dwyane Wade at number 7. We also have some mailbag questions off the top. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements. And if for whatever reason you miss one of these videos and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish, don't forget you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And last but not least, before we get started, don't forget that we're doing mailbag questions the rest of this week and all of next week and possibly into the future after that. So in the YouTube comments underneath this video, be sure to drop questions about absolutely anything and we'll hit them before we get started. All right, let's talk some basketball. So a couple things I want to hit on. First of all, we had a social clip go out yesterday talking about Dirk Nowitzki, who was higher a few players ago on our list. And some people were asking why I had Dirk over Kevin Garnett. And so I wanted to elaborate on that really quickly. First of all, obviously, when you look at their resumes, it's pretty close. Also, there's a clear defense-offense archetype thing going on. Like Dirk was a bad defender for the majority of his career, really all of his career. And, you know, KG was one of the best defensive players in the league. So you can't really look at them apples to apples. There's a bunch of subjective elements to it. So it's complicated. But here's the thing. What Dirk did in 2011 goes a significant level above anything Kevin Garnett accomplished. Not only did he have this ridiculous scoring postseason where he shot over 50% on jump shots and absolutely destroyed everybody in clutch time, but he did it against 4 of the top 6 players in the league. Kevin Durant was first-team All-NBA in 2010 and 2011. Beat the Thunder. You know, the Kobe Bryant and the Lakers were the defending champions. Dirk beat them so bad they quit in the middle of the series. Then you run into this Miami Heat team that has 2 of the top 5 players in the league, and Dwyane Wade and LeBron James, and he beat them too. And like when you really think about it, there's one playoff series in LeBron James's career where you can actually say he mentally shrunk away from the situation. One, he was a great playoff player before that in his career. Tons of huge playoff moments. And then after that, he became the most reliably great playoff player in NBA history. There's one player that has caused LeBron James to legitimately lose confidence in a playoff series. It's Dirk Nowitzki. So again, like as we look at their resumes, it's close, but that playoff run, and here's the thing, KG was the best player on a championship team in 2008. I'm not trying to undercut that, but what Dirk did in 2011 is another level above anything Kevin Garnett accomplished in his career, in my opinion. That's why I have Dirk over KG. Now, next mailbag question from Ktan38. Since the next video will likely be about Dwyane Wade, great guess, who is also my favorite player, I wanted to submit a question. You mentioned in your criteria that being the second best player on a championship team is one of the things that you value most, more than MVPs and All-NBAs, etc. I agree, but oftentimes the second best player gets overlooked and forgotten. Can you go into detail about why being the second best player on a championship team is important to you, and why sacrifice is an important element in being great in basketball and most other team sports? Great question, Ktan38. So, going to dive into this a little bit because, again, to me, what I really appreciate about being the second best player on a championship team is it almost always is a star-level player. Like, if we go back through NBA history, like, second best player on the Nuggets is Jamal Murray. I had him at the 16th or 15th, but I think I had him 16th in my player rankings. Like, he's a legitimate star basketball player, right? Andrew Wiggins was a guy who was a high-volume scorer in Minnesota who came over to Golden State and changed his game to try to fit into that Warrior system, but he was a higher-level player, right? Like, he's capable of doing a lot more off the bounce than the Warriors ask him to do. Back in 2021, Chris Middleton, star-level player. Anthony Davis in 2020. Like, that was a guy who I considered to be the 4th best player in the league at that point, who slotted down as a number 2. Pascal Siakam in 2019, right? Then we have Kevin Durant or Steph Curry in 17-18. Kyrie Irving in 2016. You guys get the point. Like, they're usually really high-caliber players that are the second-best players on championship teams. Newsflash, you don't win a championship unless you have lots of good basketball players, right? So that's not exactly a big shock. But what is interesting to me about the number 2 is usually the number 1 everything is built around them. So the system on both ends of the floor is built around their strengths and weaknesses, right? So like literally the Nuggets offense and defense is constructed around Nikola Jokic. They have to find a way to defend with him, and obviously he's the offensive fulcrum, right? Everything is kind of catered to that player. Usually the number 2 has to adapt. Like we talked about with Andrew Wiggins. This guy was over 20 points a game for 4 straight seasons, or averaged over 20 points a game in total over a 4-season span. His final 4 seasons in Minnesota, came over to Golden State and just dove into the defensive end of the floor and became one of the best perimeter defenders in the league and had to find a way to score within the Warriors system. He made a ton of sacrifices and became a great winning basketball player. Think about how we used to talk about Andrew Wiggins before he went to the Warriors, right? You know, Anthony Davis, his peers around the league like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic are having the entire offense constructed around them. Nope. He gave the keys to LeBron James and devoted all of his energy to the defensive end of the floor. He took his post touches when they came. He took the isolations when they came. But a lot of it was him working around Rajon Rondo and LeBron James offensively, right? And then, so like you guys get the point. There's a sacrifice element that comes from that. Even Kyrie Irving, the very best defensive season of his career was 2016. He did an outstanding job guarding Steph Curry in that playoff run. There's sacrifice involved. You know, we talk about the responsibilities that get filled on a basketball court, right? This is one of my most frequent little metaphors that I bring up, right? You have like a ton of responsibilities that have to get filled. And the number 1 star gets to walk in and kind of pick buffet style exactly what he wants to do, right? But that if he takes something, like let's say it's, you know, primary ball handling, then that number 2 can't take that. He's got to take something else. He's got to take secondary ball handling. He's got to take different responsibilities. And he's such a talented player that often it requires him to take responsibilities that he wouldn't take elsewhere, right? Like there's a version of Jamal Murray's game where he gets to be like all the other high-volume guards in the league. He gets to be Trae Young. He gets to be Bradley Beal. He gets to be Damian Lillard and take 14 pull-up threes a game, right? But he doesn't get to do that. He's got to find a way to fit in this Denver Nuggets system. That's why I always have an appreciation for that number 2 on a championship team. It's almost always a star-level player who makes significant sacrifices and, most importantly, adapts their game. They usually have to change and take on things that they never did earlier in their career. Pau Gasol is another great example of this. Look at the monster he became defensively and as a rebounder towards the end of that Lakers tenure there in 2009, 2010. But Wade is one of my absolute favorite examples of this. I'm going to table this right now because I want to save it for our actual Wade piece. But Dwyane Wade changed his game monumentally to become the perfect number 2 to LeBron James, even though in terms of their natural skill sets, they were a terrible fit with each other. Because they were 2 downhill perimeter players, neither of which was comfortable consistently taking catch-and-shoot jump shots or playing off the ball at that point in their careers. Now, like in their later portions, both LeBron and Dwyane Wade became great off-ball players, but at the time when they got together, it wasn't a great fit. But Wade made a lot of big changes to slide into that role. All right, we have 2 more. What do you look for in a player to tell that he has feel for the game? Also, what is your definition for feel for the game? So I don't really have a definition for feel for the game. I've said this on the show before. I actually stole this from my friend Mark Titus at Barstool Sports, but basketball is more of an art than a science to me. It's like kind of like the perfect way to encapsulate everything that I've done over the years bitching and moaning about the analytics professionals, right? And them trying to turn the game into an equation, trying to turn the game into a science when it very much is not that. But when I view the game as an art, what that means is so much of it goes beyond something we can quantify. So much of it goes beyond things that we can just describe in a sentence, right? So if I had to try to explain to you what feel for the game is, in basketball, there are chains of decisions. Usually your best player on offense does something at the beginning of a possession that breaks down the defense. From there, it's a chain of decision making. So let's take a Steph Curry pick and roll, for example. Steph is starting on the left side of the floor. Draymond Green comes up and set a screen. They blitz Steph. Steph throws a looping pass over the top, and Draymond Green catches the ball at the short roll, foul line, top of the key area, and is coming down the lane. From there is a chain of decision-making, right? Someone steps up to Draymond. Draymond has to immediately make the decision to kick to the open shooter on the weak side, right? Maybe that guy in this particular case for the Warriors is a non-shooter, and now he has to identify that his man is going to help on Draymond, and he has to cut along the baseline to catch the ball and dunk it. Now, let's say he catches the ball along the baseline, but there's another rotation from the other corner. That guy now has to make another decision to kick the ball to the other corner. That's where, like, it's funny because when we talk with our high school kids that we coach here in town, there are kind of like two elements to basketball. There's the play that you run, but then once you accomplish whatever the goal of that play is, which is to break down the defense, after that, we always just say you have to play basketball. From there, you're playing basketball. It's a vague term that means you just have to continue to make the right decision until you get a wide open layup or a dunk. In that chain of decisions, a player that has great feel for the game always seems to keep that chain moving in the right direction. Have you ever watched your team and there's that kick out pass to the corner, and instead of making a quick decision, the guy hesitates and pump fakes, and then he just kind of sits there and the guy closes out to him, and then he ends up kind of in a trap, and then he kind of has to work his way out and find an outlet pass, and the whole thing breaks down, and then you have to start over? The guys that consistently break that chain of decision making, they're guys that typically struggle with feel for the game. Whereas guys who keep that chain progressing in the right direction and consistently make the right decisions, those are guys who have great feel for the game, right? A great example of a guy that I think is outstanding feel for the game that's getting a ton of attention these days is Austin Reeves. He's kind of come to the surface with the Lakers as a primary ball handler in recent months, right? And has done a lot of stuff like that for Team USA. But before that, and you're seeing a lot of it with Team USA right now, he was an off-ball player almost entirely. And I always was talking about how, like, I loved him as the fifth man in any lineup because he's a perfect guy to put in a LeBron James team because LeBron's going to compromise the defense, and you need guys who just continually make the right decisions from there. And the same thing goes on the defensive end. If someone breaks down the defense, there's a chain of decision-making in rotation that is kind of a natural instinct. And guys who have great feel for the game tend to just kind of be one step ahead and make the right decisions in those situations. So again, feel for the game is not something I can quantify with some sort of quick little sentence. But if I had to try to explain it, it's just there's a flow to basketball. And there are players who progress that flow, and there are players who break that flow. And the players with great feel for the game progress that flow. Last one from Bob. Thoughts on Paolo Banchero for Team USA and the effect he will have on the up-and-coming Magic season. So I'm not actually going to answer this question, Bob, but I did do a full video previewing the FIBA World Cup and Team USA. That is a little bit further back on our feeds. And the tail end of that video, I did a whole thing on Paolo Banchero and how impressed I've been with him as a backup center and how I think that unlocks a bunch of interesting things for the Magic with Paolo potentially being able to play backup center with an already huge lineup. So go check out that video if you want a deeper dive on Paolo Banchero and his role with the Magic this coming season. All right, number 7, Dwyane Wade. His accolades: best player on a championship team in 2006, second best player on 2 championship teams in 2012 and 2013, 2-time first-team All-NBA, was stuck behind Kobe Bryant a lot in the early phase of his career, 8-time All-NBA overall, 3-time All-Defense, and won a scoring title in 2009, and he won the 2006 NBA Finals MVP. His claim to fame, in my opinion, is he's the best pound-for-pound athlete of this era. A mantle that Russell Westbrook took from him. So I was actually, I tweeted this out this morning because, like, I see a pretty clear line with some gaps, right? Like late 80s, and really quickly, when I say pound for pound athlete, I'm talking about the best combination of like first step quickness, lateral quickness, vertical pop, changing of direction and speed, strength, just the overall package of an athlete, but also within the context of size, so pound for pound. So for instance, like LeBron is obviously the best athlete in NBA history, right? And because he's 6'9", 270 pounds and moves like he does and all those things, but he's huge. And so if you like technically like Russell Westbrook, if I inflated him up to 6'9" and had him move the exact same amount or exact same way, he'd be a better athlete than LeBron, right? So when I say pound for pound athlete, I'm talking about like looking at that specific player regardless of his actual size of frame, but looking at all of his athletic gifts within that frame. So I think there are a couple obvious ones, right? Late 80s, early 90s, you're looking at Michael Jordan. Early 2000s, it's Vince Carter. To me, late 2000s, it's obviously Dwyane Wade. As we get into the 2010s, that's where it's Russell Westbrook. The two big gaps that are interesting to me are the late 90s and then now. And so I actually tweeted it out today and asked a bunch of people, or asked all my Twitter followers, who do you think is the best pound-for-pound athlete in the league? And the three main names that get brought up are Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, and Anthony Edwards. And Ja, the reason why I go away from Ja is I think he's just a little too thin. And I really do think that that's something that limits him in specific situations, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Like, even if he moves his feet, guys can just blow through him. And in a really physical environment, I think his lack of muscle becomes a problem. Zion Williamson is the obvious answer, and I would say that in the world where he's healthy and in shape, Zion Williamson is the best pound-for-pound athlete in the league right now. I've actually never seen a human being move the way he does with his strength, right? But I would say in the two question marks there with Ja's strength and with Zion's health, I go with Anthony Edwards. I don't think he's quite the athlete overall that Dwyane Wade was, but he has some similarities in terms of like sheer power behind the mobility that he has. He's shown some ridiculous flashes in the last couple years of top-end athleticism, so I'd lean towards Ant now. In the late 90s, I'm kind of torn between Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. But I lean towards Penny Hardaway for that specific era, but that's kind of an interesting question mark. But anyway, Dwyane Wade was that guy from about 2005 to 2011. He was the best pound-for-pound athlete in the league. It was super interesting because it was a different look in terms of his athleticism than most of the other great athletes in NBA history. Like, when you look at guys like Ja Morant's a great example. Michael Jordan was like this when he was younger. There's like a pop. Like it almost looks freaky how much they pop off the floor, right? With Wade, it was so weird because like he almost looked like he was moving in slow motion. Wade had a ridiculous cool factor with the way he moved. Like he would just take these long, slow steps, but then he could hit the gas in these gaps and literally no one could keep him in front. I've never seen a person be able to change direction and speed the way that Dwyane Wade does. It was this crazy long stepping thing. I can't remember who it was, and if somebody remembers, drop it in the comments. But somebody said, some major NBA personality around that time, I think it might have been Charles Barkley, but somebody said that Dwyane Wade has the hamstrings of a god. And that's literally what I think when I watch him, because again, if you've ever done long steps, so like if you were to go out to a basketball court and just try to run across the court in as few steps as possible, you feel it on your hamstrings a lot because that's the muscle that you use that pulls your body forward with those long steps, right? Dwyane Wade just had, I don't know if it was ridiculous hamstring strength or if he literally was just a superhuman, but the dude had unbelievable ability to change speed and direction with these long steps. But again, changing speed is a really important part of beating people off the dribble in the NBA. Dwyane Wade had this, he actually had one of the best crossovers in the league at the time, even though it wasn't a really dramatic ball movement crossover. Like it wasn't like an Allen Iverson left to right where it's way out here and then it's back over here. Wade would like start in the corner or start on the block and he'd come up to the wing. And when he'd catch the ball on the wing, if it was in a triple threat situation, he'd kind of catch and like kind of pause in midair, and he'd either quick rip back towards the baseline or he'd rip towards the right. And he would kind of pause and there'd be like this brief hesitation as he's kind of sitting there, and the defender would have to make a decision. And if the defender kind of bit going right, he would just rip back through to the left and he'd dust him. On a live dribble, that was kind of his crossover. He'd kind of pause with the ball in a high hesitation in his right hand, and if the defender was leaning towards his right, he would just whip it back across to his left and be all the way past you towards the basket. He was also a master at weaponizing the ball screen in two specific ways. He'd get the defender to start sidling up over the screen, and then he'd whip that crazy right to left crossover. And then he was the very best in the league at splitting the pick and roll. So what does it mean to split the pick and roll? So if you're in a ball screen and you're the on-ball defender, as you are coming off the screen, there's usually the screen defender somewhere up around the level of the screen to contain the ball handler, right? So imagine a pick and roll against the Boston Celtics, right? And Ray John Rondo's guarding Dwyane Wade. And, here comes Michael Beasley to set a screen, okay? And as he's coming off of the screen, Kevin Garnett shows high, right? In that situation, there is a gap between Kevin Garnett, the screen defender, and Michael Beasley, the screener. There's a little gap there. The problem is the vast majority of athletes are not capable of going full speed over the top of the screen and then suddenly changing direction and cutting back that way. Dwyane Wade could. So Dwyane Wade would come flying off these screens, and it was almost like an S motion. Like he'd come over the screen and then immediately cut back to the left and just go right between that big man. And here's the thing. What happens if you beat that big man with a full head of steam? There's nobody that's capable of getting to the back line in time. And that was a lot of Dwyane Wade's dunks in that era. He would come over the top of the screen, split the pick and roll, and then just rise up and dunk it. And if some idiot had the nerve to come over and help out of the weak side corner, now he's getting posterized. But that was kind of like, you didn't really even see, like, you'll see a split pick and roll every once in a while now, and there are players that can do it. It happens. But Dwyane Wade did it more than anybody in the league at that time. That was a huge part of how he generated rim pressure in pick and roll. But here's the thing. Bottom line, in his prime, literally nobody could keep Dwyane Wade in front of them off the dribble, which was the superpower that he used to win his first title. So his crowning achievement, leading the Heat to the NBA title in 2006. He had a great regular season, averaged 27, 6, and 7 on 58% true shooting. Not bad for a third-year player, right? Finished 6th in MVP voting, second team All-NBA. Then he went up a level in the playoffs from there, 28, 6, and 6 on 59% true shooting. We went in deep about this in the Dirk Nowitzki video, but Dallas really had no ability to contain Dwyane Wade off the dribble, and they got absolutely barbecued to the tune of 35, 8, and 4 on 57% true shooting, and Wade wins Finals MVP. From there, his career got really weird. So in 2007, he dislocates his shoulder, misses a big chunk of games. They end up losing in the first round of the Chicago Bulls. 2008, his left knee starts having issues, and they had one of the worst records in the league. So Pat Riley actually shuts him down for the rest of the season. He sits out. By the way, he had his first knee surgery in the summer of 2007, an indicator of what was to come in the early 2010s, which we'll get to in a minute. 2009 and 2010 were weird, mostly healthy. He has a pretty reliable pull-up jump shot. Like, Wade was never a good three-point shooter, but he actually became a pretty good pull-up mid-range shooter. To give you an idea, in 2009, he shot 646 pull-up jump shots and made 42% of them, which was a really important shot for them, especially as he got into the phase of his career where his athleticism started to decline. And he hit a lot of really big jump shots. Famously, in the 2013 NBA Finals in Game 7, he hit back-to-back-to-back pull-up mid-range jump shots in the second quarter that kind of helped float the things. And you know how it feels in a Game 7. It's like every basket feels like a clutch shot, right? But he had a lot of really big pull-up jump shots over the course of the tail end of his career, which was a really important part of his game as his athleticism started to decline. But he had back-to-back top 5 MVP finishes in both seasons, in large part because that team just wasn't very good. Michael Beasley was the second best player on the team. It was like Jermaine O'Neal and Sean Marion, Udonis Haslem, Quentin Richardson. But the crazy thing is he won 43 and 47 games in those 2 seasons, which is why he ended up with 2 top 5 MVP finishes. So then we have the Heatles. So LeBron and Chris Bosh come to town. Really weird team that first year. I was doing trivia with the Nerd Sesh guys. So if you haven't seen that either, go back on our YouTube feed. I did a whole couple hours of trivia with the Nerd Sesh guys, which was actually a ton of fun. We hit a lot of random NBA tangents along the way. But in that one of the questions that Carson asked was, name players that started playoff games for the 2011 Miami Heat, for that 2011 Miami Heat playoff run. This is crazy. Joel Anthony and Mario Chalmers is the obvious ones, right? Mario Chalmers actually only started 1 game. Mike Bibby started 20 games in that playoff run, couldn't make a shot to save his life. Zydrunas Ilgauskas started 8 playoff games for that 2011 Miami Heat team. It's funny because 2012, 2013 were really deep rosters with a lot of talent, really important role players. The 2011 team was devoid of any real reliable role player talent after the big 3. But they get out of the East, then they win Game 1 versus the Mavs. They should have won Game 2. They were up 15 in the fourth quarter, but they blow it. Then they win Game 3 against the Mavs. So if you freeze at that point in time, they're up 2-1 and should probably be up 3-0. LeBron at that point's averaging 27-6 on 51, 44, 80 splits, which is excellent, right? Wade is just cooking, 29, 9, and 5 on 57% from the field at that point, 40% from three. Wade was ridiculously good in the 2011 finals. But then LeBron falls apart. Final 3 games of the series, LeBron attempts just 45 shots, 15 points per game, and the Heat blow their 2-1 lead and lose to the Mavs. As you know, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, like that's a big feather in Dirk's cap, in my opinion, really the one mental breakdown of LeBron's career. But then in 2012, Dwyane Wade takes his first significant step back as a player. He drops down from 26 to 22 points per game. We start hearing rumblings of the knee issue coming back up, especially in that Pacers series. Famously has just 5 points in the Game 3 loss. He just never really was the same athlete after that point. To give you guys an idea, Dwyane Wade had 5 30-point playoff games in the 2011 playoff run. The following 3 years, he had 3 total. So it just wasn't really the same guy after that first playoff run. But that was a really cool phase of Dwyane Wade's career for me as a fan of his, because even though he never really had his top-tier burst, he added all of these little things to his skill set to become a dependable number 2 star alongside LeBron James. A lot of sacrifices from Dwyane Wade as well, which I thought was a really impressive demonstration of just how much of a winner Dwyane Wade was. So, he added a post game that he didn't really have earlier in his career. There were 59 players in 2013 to run at least 150 post-ups. Dwyane Wade finished 6th out of 59 players that season, scoring 1.01 points per possession. Wade had a really good hook shot with his right hand in the lane, a little push shot, kind of like half hook floater thing. And then Wade was always an underrated passer, but a really, really good passer towards the tail end of his career there in Miami. He literally became the very best cutter in the league off the ball. This was a very important thing with LeBron James. He scored 100 field goals in the 2013 season on cuts to the basket. That led the league for guards by a mile. I was looking through the list today. The closest I could find was Tony Allen, and he had 60-something. So he was just the best cutter in the league at that point. He learned how to drive closeouts. In 2013, Dwyane Wade shot just 26% from 3, but he converted spot-up possessions at 1.05 points per possession, which was in the 74th percentile for spot-up players that year. So that goes to show you just how good he was at driving closeouts. And then he became one of the very best passers in the league. 27 players ran at least 750 pick and rolls in the 2013 season, and Wade came in at 4th in that list in efficiency, despite not necessarily scoring much as a shooter out of pick and roll because of his ability to pass the basketball. So like I mentioned earlier, he did literally everything in his power to just create a version of himself that could coexist alongside LeBron James with his diminished athleticism, which to me was such a great indicator of the winner that he was. He became an outstanding defensive player. He was one of the best, guard shot blockers in the league. He took primary point of attack assignments. He was constantly grabbing contested rebounds. It's everything that I was begging for Russell Westbrook to do over the last few years as his athleticism declined. That's what Dwyane Wade did in the tail end of his career. And as a result, he was able to be the second best player on 2 more championship teams, which are significant things to add to his resume, like we talked about earlier. And you got to think they were really tight margins. 2012, they nearly lost twice in the Pacers series and in the Celtics series. They also trailed 1-0 in the Thunder series. Every game was close in that series. You go to the San Antonio series in 2013. We're talking down 3-2. Wade had 23 points in Game 7 of that series. So, you barely win, and Dwyane Wade grinds out all of these little winning details in his game as his athleticism declines. If he doesn't do that, they don't win. End of story. And so I think to answer the mailbag question from the beginning, that to me is why I value number 2s so much, is they usually represent sacrifice. They represent sacrifice and adaptability from star-level players who just want to win. The biggest what-if of Dwyane Wade's career is what if Dwyane Wade's knees had held up? The decline was rapid. He averaged just 19 points per game in the 2014 season, missed 28 games that year. He averaged just 16 points per game in the 2013 postseason and just 18 points per game in the 2014 postseason. So by the end, he was really just a shell of himself. But you got to think about what was happening at the same time there. While Wade was going like this, both LeBron and Bosh were going like this. Bosh had added this dependable perimeter jump shot. This crazy stat. Chris Bosh made 74 threes in the 2014 season. He made just 87 in his entire career before that. He shot 52% on corner threes in the 2014 playoff run. That was like a huge part of the Heat offense. Like, and you might famously remember Game 4 against the Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Garnett helping on LeBron James drives while Chris Bosh was parked out in the corner making huge clutch jump shots. In addition to that, LeBron was ascending. By 2013-2014, LeBron was on a tier by himself at the top of the league and was kind of approaching a mastery of the game of basketball. And so you can imagine with the spacing that Chris Bosh was providing, Eric Spoelstra kind of coming into his own, understanding how to coach that team, LeBron James ascending. If you combine that with the ridiculous downhill dribble penetration that Dwyane Wade had in 2011 and before, that's a really, really interesting team that could have won a lot more games. And so the biggest what if of Wade's career, in my opinion, is what if Dwyane Wade's knees had held up? All right, guys, that is all I have for today. We will be back with number 6 tomorrow. As always, I appreciate you guys, and we will see you then.